Thank you so much for that introduction. And I also, can you hear this? Okay, good, yes. And I also want to thank ABOTA and Tamara and Mike, who I've been talking to over the last few months, for putting this on. This is really important, I think, and I'm not going to reiterate all the very cogent reasons you've heard already. For you as educators and all of us involved in education to really know about our legal system and how it impacts our lives, but also the lives of our students and their families every day. And you see the title of my presentation here is the Bill of Rights in Action and Civil Dialogue in the Classroom. And here's the clicker. Bill of Rights in Action is kind of a double entendre here because it's, at one point, it's the name of our publication that I do edit and I sometimes write for. Bill of Rights in Action, from which the lesson that we'll use today came from. And of course, it's also a description of what we're talking about, in that we're looking at the Bill of Rights in action in our daily lives and how it affects our daily lives. So the second part is civil dialogue in the classroom, or civil conversation, as I'll call it today. And civil conversation is a means that you, as teachers in the classroom, can use for any controversial subject that you might have to talk about. The subject we're going to talk about is police body cameras and the use of force. When I talk to people about this subject, they find that it's a really critical subject for their students. It's on their students' minds. Is that pretty much true for this group as well? Okay, good, yeah. So that's the subject matter we're going to be using, but I just want to say before we go any further that the methodology I'm going to talk about today is something that you can use for any controversial subject. Some teachers might be wary of jumping right into something that can spur such emotion, and understandably so, right away when using the civil conversation methodology. So I just want to preface this by saying that what we'll talk about today and what I'll be demonstrating for you is something that you can use with any controversial subject or a subject for which there are more than one reasonable position that you can take on it. That also, of course, indicates that one of the objectives in what I'm doing right now, this will be a little bit different than what we've maybe seen throughout the day up till now, in that we're going to do a little bit of lesson demonstration. It's going to be a little interactive, so you'll be involved in what we're doing. First, let me talk a little bit about Constitutional Rights Foundation. Just by show of hands, how many of you have heard of Constitutional Rights Foundation? Okay, good. No, almost everybody has. Maybe because you read the materials beforehand, that's fine. That's okay, no. Constitutional Rights Foundation, we are a national organization, although we're centered in Los Angeles, and that's where our office has always been. We have been in existence since 1962, and we started with the mission of instilling in the next generation, the upcoming generation, all of the values that are incorporated into our founding documents, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence. And when I say those values, we really are a civic education organization. So we want to instill civic engagement. The interesting thing in our starting in 1962 is that we were started by a group of lawyers and educators from the School of Education at UCLA, where I went to education school, as well as the dean of the law school. We're very, very concerned at that time in 1962 that students really didn't understand the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. They didn't understand basic civics. So we don't need to feel so bad these days that that's our concern, okay? It's been around. It's always been a concern. And I think it's always a legitimate concern. And so that's why we're here. We're nonpartisan. That means not only we're not associated with a political party, but we don't take positions, advocacy positions on legislation or that kind of thing, with the exception of more funding for civic education. We do advocate for that. And that gives you a little bit of an orientation to our nonpartisan, nonprofit educational focus in the reading on police body cameras. In our publications and in our programs, whether it's Civic Action Project, which I talked with some of you about during the lunch hour, or Bill of Rights in Action, or the mock trial, which is how I came to CRF 15 years ago. we always want to present something in a nonpartisan way to give students the tools for critical thinking so that they understand multiple perspectives on any critical or controversial issue, and they're able to look at all sides and then speak about it intelligently, at least with an understanding of what the multiple points of view are. So that gives you an orientation of our focus and what goes into the reading that you have in your packet. And that comes, as I already showed you, from Bill of Rights in Action. This is a little ad copy over here, so you can just look at that if you'd like. But the idea is also that we focus not only on government and law-related education, but also U.S. history and world history. We don't like to leave world history teachers out when we're talking about civic education. It's called Bill of Rights in Action because it's pretty much been called that since the mid-60s when its early incarnation was published. So we've always called it Bill of Rights in Action, but we always include, or I should say 99% of the time, we include world history as well, because it's important for students to have a global understanding and also an understanding of the history of the world that has brought us here today. But the focus, again, and going back to what we're looking at right now, is this critical issue of police body cameras and the use of force and how those two issues relate to each other. And in doing so, I just want you to think about for a moment an incident recently where a police body camera was an issue. Can you all picture one of the recent incidents where that was actually an issue? I'm thinking, of course, of Charlotte and the shooting that happened there, where there was the release just a few days ago, I think about 5 days ago, of police body camera footage of the shooting of Keith Scott. And there was a demand for that footage to be released. There was a police dashboard camera footage that was released, and then there was the body camera footage that was released. And apparently there's a lot more footage that wasn't released, and so that's part of what's been happening in Charlotte, is the public's demand for more of the footage to be released and what the full picture of what happened because of the dispute about what exactly happened in that incident. And even the release of the police body camera footage didn't really solve the public's demand for that footage. It didn't resolve it. And so we're going to be looking at this issue today, but just keep in mind that it's not always going to be, and this is maybe one of the issues you can bring into the discussions that you're going to have, it's not always going to be something that's easily solved, even by the release of the footage through the new technology that now more and more police departments are using with body cameras. Just by a quick show of hands, I know you were all encouraged to do the reading beforehand. How many of you actually read the article? Okay, so maybe about half of you. Okay, that's good. So we'll take a little time to just read it or review it right before we get into our discussions. But before then, I just want to review with you and those of you who read it, what are some of the constitutional issues that come up in the use of police body cameras or in incidents of police use of force with these body cameras? Privacy. Privacy is an issue. Is that what you were going to say too? Okay, yeah. Good. So your right to privacy, which again we know isn't directly spelled out in any one of the first 10 amendments, but it still is a concern. It still has been recognized as, of course, as a constitutional right in many cases like that. So what other kinds of issues might come up? I can think of one issue that's not directly stated in the reading, but does have a lot to do with what we've been talking about here, and I'm glad you're also going to have a session talking about the right to a jury trial later. And in listening to our speakers from ABOTA and Chuck last night talking about the importance of juries. Now, I worked as a public defender, a criminal defense attorney, so the civil law world is a little, I studied it in law school, but it's still a little amorphous to me. I like things that are, I like the criminal law where you have a prosecutor, you have a defendant, and you have a defense attorney, and let's see if it's going to be an acquittal or guilty. But twice in the Bill of Rights, juries are mentioned. Once in the 7th Amendment when we're talking about civil cases, But don't forget the Sixth Amendment, where we're talking about in criminal cases, your right to not just a jury, but a jury of your peers. So that's really, really critical. And what's interesting when we think about the criminal law world, as opposed to the civil law world, in the criminal law world, a prosecutor needs to get 12 jurors who are all going to agree on guilt in order to get a conviction. Whereas in the defense world, you really just need one juror who's going to be that one person who will hold out and say, I disagree with the other 11. Hard to find that one juror, I got to tell you. There's psychology and sociology that all works into why jurors want to maybe agree when they get into the jury room together. But they might fight it out, but really on the defense side, you just need the one for a hung jury. Rarely happens, but could happen, and that's what you're looking for. So some of the skills that go into being on a jury, whether it's civil or criminal, are skills of deliberation. And civil conversation that we're looking at is a form of deliberation. And we ask ourselves then, what is deliberation? What is it that jurors do? How many of you have ever served on a jury? Okay, how many of you ever served on a jury all the way to a verdict? Okay, almost all of you. That brought back some memories of voir dire right there. Whoa, where am I? Okay, what is deliberation? Well, we have 3 Ds. First is debate. And debate is very important. It's very important that students learn debate skills. It's an important skill set in life. As we learned the other night, and we learn often, it's an important skill set if you're in politics. It's really, really, really key that students learn how to advocate for a position and really fight for a position that they really believe in as they go into life. So you have here 2 opinions that clash. And what's the goal of a debate? Can someone? To win, right? Yes. Goal of a debate is to win. Our adversarial court or system of jurisprudence, system of law, is adversarial. It's like a debate. One side wants to win. They want to beat the other side. And there's an important reason for wanting to do that. But that's not what deliberation is. It's not debate. It's not trying to win. It's not trying to beat the other side. Another D that we often use in the classroom is discussion. And in discussion, you've got different opinions that are being shared. They could go one way, they could go another way. There's multiple sides, and everyone's going to be talking about their particular perspective. It's very subjective. Sometimes the discussion is about, or often it's about a specific subject, and so people are bringing to bear their knowledge of a subject and just trying to share that knowledge with others. So discussion is important, another important skill set. And I have a kind of a wavy line here to show that discussion does work its way into deliberation, and there's a part of deliberation that does involve just an open sharing at some point of ideas and facts. Deliberation is a little bit different. In deliberation, you do have multiple points of view that are represented, and those multiple points of view come together, not to clash, but hopefully to find that middle ground, that common ground, or that general area of understanding there in the center when all of those perspectives are brought together. And if you think about, all of you who've been on a jury, think about your jury experience, or think about what we've talked about with deliberation already, that's really what it is. It's, okay, everyone needs to, we all need to have a common understanding. So in a jury, let's have a common understanding what the facts are. That's what this whole trial's been about. What are the facts? What happened? So we want to get an understanding of those facts, and then we want to try to reach a common agreement about what those facts should mean, or maybe what those facts portend for one side or the other, if you're on a jury for the case. In this particular issue that we're using here, or any time you use deliberation in the classroom, you're still looking for that common agreement. Even if the common agreement isn't on the fundamental question of a yes or no on some moral issue, it can still be a common understanding or common agreement about, well, okay, what is the issue? What are the facts? What do they imply? Those are also kinds of points of agreement that we might look for. Okay, so in civil conversation and as a form of deliberation, there are a number of rules for civil conversation. These are actually printed in your book on the civil conversation worksheets that follow the article on police body cameras. So I'm not going to read through all these with you, but I just want to emphasize a couple of them. Number one, read the text as if it was written by someone you really respected. So you might not know who the author is. I happen to be a co-author on this particular article, so I want you to like it, but I'm thick-skinned, so you can criticize it to me later. That's fine. But the idea is that read it as if it's written by someone you really respected. In other words, have an open mind when you're reading it. That what you're reading is something that is that will present to you multiple sides of an issue, and you're getting some good information from it. But those first three words, read the text, is key, especially in this age when we're talking about Common Core standards in social studies. A lot of social studies teachers say Common Core, in many ways, is just kind of reinforcing what I already do in my classroom. All the best practices I use in my classroom, Common Core just kind of enunciated them a little bit better than, or a little more clearly maybe than had been enunciated before. But I already do that. And the key is reading the text, and reading the text carefully, so that you can actually get from the text important information, important facts, and an important understanding. So that's key. Also, the idea is with a civil conversation, all the students are using the same text. They're all reading the same thing, which is why it's really important to have something. You can use it with news articles, as long as there's at least two sides of a position that are presented. And hopefully you'll find something where they're presented pretty fairly. So news articles can work for that. Everyone in the conversation group should participate, and that goes along with everyone should also listen to others, listening carefully. Clarifying questions. This isn't really self-explanatory, so I'll give you an example. Clarifying questions are basically non-judgmental questions. So during a deliberation, in order to get an understanding of what someone else is saying, you don't want to ask a judgmental question like, hold on a second, how could you say something like that? Didn't you read this part? Don't you understand? That's phrased in kind of maybe that's a righteous question, but it's a judgmental question that kind of shuts conversation down or shuts down the deliberation. So you want to ask clarifying questions, especially at the beginning, where if somebody says something that, whoa, that's not what I understood from the reading, that might be what you're thinking, but you ask the clarifying question, you said X. Can you explain that one more time? Or can you show me where you saw that in the text? I didn't see that. Can you show me? Because I'd like to understand. So clarifying questions are kind of non-judgmental. Think of them as friendly questions where you're just trying to get clarity. Being respectful, always important. Referring to the text, ties in with number one. And focus on ideas, not personalities. That comes right out of conflict resolution. In one of my past lives, I was a mediator, and so that's a very important thing in mediation is focusing on ideas, not personalities. Like if you're a student who's stuck in a group with someone that you really don't like, that you're just going to kind of use the civil conversation time of the class period as a way to sort of dig in at this person you don't like or something. No, we're focusing on ideas, not personalities. That's why everyone's using the same text. Okay, what I want you to do is just to take about 5 minutes, since most of you have read it already, just take 5 minutes. I just want you to review the text. Part of the close reading methodology that goes into Common Core, for example, is to look back at the text and take your pen and I just want you to look at questions 1 through 5 in your reading guide. And individually, just on your own right now, just start answering questions 1 through 5. We probably don't have time to necessarily go through all the questions, but we'll go through most of them. So just take about 5 minutes, look back through the text. You can underline things, circle things, and also write down your answers to questions 1 through 5 in the Civil Conversation Reading Guide. Okay, with your students, you can have them do it like this. They can work on this individually, preparing their answers, and then you can put them in groups. If you want, you can put them in small groups first and then have them work on their answers individually like this. Either way is okay, but at this point, we do need you in groups. Now, the best scenario for this is not auditorium seating, but in your classroom, if you have tables or if they have individual desks that can be moved, so that they're in a small group or a small circle, that works best. So all I'm going to have you do is just, you can work with a few people near you or in your row, just so you're working with about 4, maybe 5. If you can keep it to 4, that's great, but maybe 5 people, that's fine. So you can just group yourselves. Since we're in this auditorium, I think that's the easiest way. Great. If you need to get up and move down a couple seats, please do. So just form yourselves into small groups, steps. How many of you heard of structured academic controversy? Okay, so that's a very important deliberation model. It's very structured. Civil conversation is similar. It is structured. It's not quite as structured with the same steps as a structured academic controversy, but there are still stages you want to be in. So that's the first point I wanted to mention. The second one is, why are we just focusing on just questions 1 and 2 and just those questions for this first part before stopping? Why do you think? Yes?
I think you want the students to agree on the meaning and the facts within the article before they get further into their opinions.
Right. Okay, so this teacher over here said, I'm assuming teacher, said that you want students to all agree on the meaning and the facts before moving on. Okay, so at the beginning, it's important for that, picture that diagram with those 4 arrows I had. So this is one part of the common understanding. Maybe students won't agree on any more than this. They might not agree on any more by the end of the process. What's this article about? Because they might have such strong opinions that they're not going to be dissuaded from having strong opinions. And in fact, the goal isn't to dissuade people from having opinions. It's just to have more of an understanding of what the other side or what the multiple perspectives are. So at this stage, it's important to stop here because this may be the greatest success as far as having that common understanding. But it also is just a way for everyone to be on the same page, literally and figuratively, before moving on to the next part of the discussion. And the next part of the discussion is where the discussion leader really starts to take a stronger role. Not to control the discussion, but just to facilitate it and to be the person who kind of moves it along. So the discussion leader's instructions are right here. And they are, as you see, to begin the conversation by asking every member of the group to respond to questions 3 and 4 of the reading guide. Things you disagreed with or agreed with in the reading, and then things you disagreed with in the reading. So each person in the group is going to have a chance to do that. Members should not just repeat what others say, so focus on those rules that are printed right there on the reading guide. And then ask the entire group to respond to question 5 and jot down the issues raised. But you focus right now on just everyone being able to share what they agreed with, what they disagreed with. And again, clarifying questions are fine, but no pointed or judgmental type questions. So let's take about 5 minutes to have everyone, that'll give at least each person about a minute in the group to speak about questions 3 and 4. So go ahead and start on that. I hate to interrupt these discussions. No, that's all right. I know, and I gotta say, I am so spoiled, because when I do a lesson demonstration, you all are on task. And I always know I'm working with teachers, they're totally gonna get it, and they're gonna focus. So my heart goes out to you, and I know what the struggles are. To keep your students that way. Anyway, and I was listening to some of the discussions, and it's really great. And what's good about you, of course, you doing this yourselves in this demonstration model is that you kind of get an idea of, this is, it sets a high bar in your discussions. This is what you would love for your students to get to. They'd be able to get to this kind of discussion. And you're actually going to help them do that if you build up to this. Some teachers, as I mentioned at the beginning, might not want to jump into doing this with police body cameras and use of force right away. You might want to start with something a little less close to home, for many of our students in their neighborhoods, in their communities, maybe something a little broader where they could still form different opinions, still have something that they can agree with and disagree with, but then they'll build up and they'll have the skills of deliberation, asking clarifying questions, listening to others carefully, doing the close reading of the text by circling or making marks and using the reading guide before they jump into something where they might really have something stronger that they want to say. Because you don't want them to get into the debate. You want to try to keep them from the debate. And they may do it, and so, as you know, part of your job is you keep them focused on the task at hand. I know I only have a couple more minutes, but I want to just debrief the process with you. Was there anything that you read during or heard in your discussion that was new to you or that jumped out at you as something that, yes?
Well, our group was talking a lot about the idea that this isn't clear. We still need clarity of this and transparency of what's happening in the community and the police officers. And something as simple as Donna says something about the turning on and off of the actual cameras. But you do hear in the news, they turn them off sometimes, or they're turned off at points. Why are they turned off? And the community maybe doesn't understand that. And I think that'd be a good talking point with students, like, why are they doing this? Why would it be turned off? Is it too heavy to wear? What's the reasoning for that? And that we have discussed many topics to get that kind of going.
Okay, good. Yes?
Well, in our group, a question occurred that I hadn't thought of. It gets to the purpose of it all. Is it to prevent police brutality? Is it to have more? Is it to have additional evidence in a court case? Is it a deterrent effect? And we got into a discussion of what is the purpose of having a body camera in order to evaluate then how the body cameras ought to be used. And that wasn't something I had thought of when reading it, but it came out in the conversation and became a point that we could deliberate about together.
Right. Sounds good. And was there anyone who had one opinion about this issue, a strong opinion, perhaps? And did you hear anything that changed your mind about something? About the whole thing or about some aspect? Did you hear anything that changed your mind? Anyone? No? That's okay. As I said at the beginning, we're not trying to dissuade anyone from having opinions or dissuade our students from having opinions, but just to get more of an understanding. Did anyone have an opinion and you heard a strong argument on the other side? And what was that strong argument? Even if you don't agree with it, what was that strong argument? Yes?
I don't necessarily have a strong opinion on one side or the other, but one thing that I read that I found interesting was the point was made that because the prosecutors and the police officers or law enforcement officers so often work in tandem as kind of a team, that could interfere with the prosecutor's ability potentially to remain unbiased in making a decision whether or not to prosecute a law enforcement officer.
Okay, good. Yeah, and that's an important policy level discussion to have, which is why it was included at the beginning of the article. I think I'm just about out of time. So what I would like is for, of course, now that you've gotten your feet wet with this, to continue the discussion. You can continue the discussion on this subject, of course. Also, I'll make available to Tamara the lesson plan that goes with the civil conversation, so you can have that and you can apply it, as I mentioned, across a whole range of issues, especially controversial issues. And with that, thank you very much.